Well, we're in the second Sunday of this season in the church that we call Lent. Lent, for those of you who didn't, grow up in a church or grow up in a liturgical church where the church calendar was observed, the season of Lent is about anticipating the death and resurrection of Jesus. So it's this period of 40 days, 46 if you count the Sundays, uh, days leading up to Good Friday and Easter Sunday, where we acknowledge, we celebrate the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And so what we're doing during Lent as a Christian body is we're voluntarily participating in our own death and resurrection. I don't know if that's strong language, but that's what Lent is about. It's taking this season before the death and resurrection of Christ, and in order to kind of anticipate, prepare ourselves for that event, we go through our own process of dying and rising. Specifically, dying to the sin in our lives. So Lent is the season where we say, hey, slow down, back up, put the phone down, put the distractions away, stop lying to yourself, stop lying to other people, and let's be honest about the stuff that's going on in your life and the stuff that's going on in our world. Right? Let's maybe take it a little more seriously than we do in other seasons of the year. Because we need that, right? We need someone to say, okay, now's going to be the concentrated window where we're going to be honest, because otherwise we'll just keep running around. So Lent is that season for us where we can be a little more honest, a little more self-reflective, and the purpose is not sort of self-flagellation. We're not trying to just intentionally make life miserable. We're trying to be more faithful to Christ. And that takes some intention. It doesn't just happen. And so we go through this process of reflecting, acknowledging things in our lives that probably don't fit, shouldn't be there. And then maybe engaging in practices like prayer and fasting and charity, giving. Practices that shape our characters, that actually help us put the things away that we know need to go away. Right? Help us put to death the things that we know need to die. So that maybe when we show up on Easter Sunday and we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, maybe in our own personal lives we're experiencing a little resurrection, a little victory over something maybe that's been going on in our lives for a while. So that's Lent. That's the season of Lent. One area where Lent really challenges us, I guess I'll call it a domain or an arena of sin, a category maybe, I don't know, is the arena of what I'll call self-preservation. There are forces both inside and outside of your life that are always pressuring you to keep things the way they are, to keep life just the way it is. And one of the truths that Lent uncovers for us is that my penchant for self-preservation eventually is gonna run you into a collision course with Jesus. And you're gonna have to make a choice to either continue going the way you've been going, keep things the way they are, or choose the Jesus way. Rarely are those two ways the same. This is in Luke chapter 13. It says, at that time some Pharisees said to Jesus, get away from here if you want to live. Herod Antipas wants to kill you. Jesus replied, go tell that fox that I will keep on casting out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and the third day I will accomplish my purpose. Yes, today, tomorrow, and the next day I must proceed on my way, for it wouldn't do for a prophet of God to be killed except in Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers. How often I've wanted to gather your children together as a hen protects her chicks beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me. And now look, your house is abandoned, and you will never see me again until you say, blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Jesus has been traveling. He's been on his way to Jerusalem. And he arrives in Jerusalem. He has an altercation with a group of religious leaders called the Pharisees. Think of them as a group of pastors or priests. They just have a lot more authority in the community, right? Like I drive a 2006 Pontiac Vibe. Nobody cares what I think, right, in this community. You don't have a lot of authority in this world. But they did, okay? So it's a religious group. They've got a lot of authority in their community. And they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, you need to get out of town. If you want to live, you should leave. Because there's this guy named Herod. I'll talk about him in just a minute. There's this guy named Herod who wants you dead. And if you stay here, that's what's going to happen. So if you want to live, our advice would be to take off. The pivotal phrase here is if you want to live. If you want to live. See, we all want to live. It's both quantity and quality thing. I mean, most people I know want to live as long as they can and also want to live a certain way. So it might be that, you have some ideal in your mind about when you finally arrived that you've got life just the way that you want it. And maybe you're someone who is fortunate enough to have actually gotten there. So you've got life just the way you want it, right? You've got the number of kids you wanted. You're making the money you wanted. You're living in the house you wanted. You got the job you wanted. You got the marriage you want, right? You got life the way you want. A lot of other people, they have that vision and they spend their whole lives trying to get there. But even within that, even if you don't have sort of the ideal life that you wanted or that you envisioned, you do have life in many ways sort of the way you want it. And you know that anytime anyone messes around with it, right? If someone, doesn't load the dishwasher the way that you want it loaded, or, doesn't, prepare a meal the way you like it, or, leaves things laying around in ways that you don't like. We all have lives that we have things the way we want them. I like my coffee this way. I like to, this is what I want to do on my Saturday. Everybody I know wants to live. We want to live as long as we can, and we want to live the way we want to live. So when this religious community comes to Jesus and says, if you want to live, I'd get out of town because there's this guy who wants to kill you. See, they're appealing to his sense of self-preservation. See, they don't know. We do because we've been reading Luke's gospel from the beginning. So we already know, Jesus already has told us twice that the way in which he's going to go about accomplishing God's agenda, bringing about the kingdom of God, is that he's going to die. He knows that. It's why he came to Jerusalem. He even says it in this passage. So he knows that. They don't know that. So they're appealing to his sense of self-preservation. Nobody wants to die. Jesus doesn't want to die any more than you do. So they're appealing to his sense of self-preservation. If you want to live, get out of town. We all have forces operating on us all the time that are pressuring us to keep things the way they are. The irony in this story is that while they're appealing to Jesus' sense of self-preservation, it's their penchant for self-preservation that's really on display. The reason they go to Jesus and tell him to get out of town in the first place is because Jesus threatens their way of life. See, they say that Herod wants Jesus dead, and that's true. But it's not the whole truth. Herod, in Luke's gospel, he's a representative figure. He represents more than just himself. Herod he's a Jew, so he's a religious guy. Really, there weren't a lot of Jews in Jesus' day who weren't overtly religious. Herod's a religious man, Jewish, but he's also a member of a very influential and very wealthy family. He was, in fact, the richest man in that part of the world. Incredibly wealthy and very influential. Take me too long to give you the history of his family, but his family had a long history of being sort of in political leadership among the people of Israel. So he's Jewish, he's religious, but he's also incredibly wealthy. And because he sits in this Jewish but incredibly wealthy, he gets courted by the Romans. So the Romans are the presiding military power, right? They're the superpower in the world that has taken over this region and basically made the people of Israel their political subjects. So they take a guy like Herod, and Herod becomes sort of the local puppet king. They even let him call himself King of the Jews. Because he's Jewish, so he's one of them, but he's really wealthy, and he likes being wealthy. I mean, don't we all? He doesn't want that to get, no, he doesn't want anyone messing around with his wealth. And so he's sort of in this place of tension. He's probably got members of his religious community, like the Pharisees, who don't like the Romans at all and would like to see them gone. But then he's got the Romans who can do whatever they want. And he's sort of right in the middle. So Herod represents sort of an alliance, a trinity of forces, all operating together. You've got military, political, you've got economic, and you've got religious. And they're all sort of working together in Herod. So again, Herod's representative. He's representative of a broader reality. That there are military, political, economic, and religious forces that form a sort of alliance. And they shape society in a way that works for them. They develop a status quo. And then, of course, they're constantly working to sort of shape and maintain society in that way. And so Jesus is a threat to all of them. With his talk of the rule of God, the kingdom of God. If Jesus had just hit the scene and taught people what the Christian church often teaches people, oh, believe in me and you can go to heaven when you die, nobody would have cared. Nobody would have cared. The Romans, oh, that's cute. The economic powers would be like, oh, whatever. The religious people, nobody would have cared. It literally would have made no difference in the world. It's become our mainstay as the Christian church. But when Jesus steps on the scene and says, you're not in charge anymore. My Father's in charge, and he doesn't like the way that you're doing business. And so things are going to change. There's a new king. Well, no, wait a minute. What do you mean, Jesus? No, like Caesar's not king. My Father is. And this world that you all know and are comfortable with and like the way things operate, this is not how God designed the world to operate. And so this is all going to change. And hey, you over there, the really powerful and the really wealthy and the really influential, when all of this changes, and you know how you're on the top right now? Well, when it changes, you're going to be on the bottom. And all of you over here who are poor and sick and you have nothing and you're being oppressed, well, when all of this changes, you're going to find yourself on top. See, that kind of language, that creates tension. Jesus is a threat to everybody. So it isn't just Herod that wants Jesus dead. I mean, Herod's representative. The Pharisees would also be perfectly happy if he disappeared. I mean, they don't necessarily want to take him out, but if someone else did their work for them, and they're not going to lose sleep over it. And the Romans could care less. They'll kill anybody that gets in their way. There's an alliance of forces in their world military, political, economic, religious, that work together to shape society in a way that works for them, for the very powerful, for the very rich, and for the very religious. Now, in the same way that there was an alliance of forces working in their world to keep their world the way that it was, there's an alliance of forces in our world. There's an alliance of military, political, economic, and religious forces in our world that shape our society the way that it is, and very much want to keep it that way. They very much have vested interests in our world operating the way that our world operates because they benefit from it. On a personal level, I mean, that's like at a society, community level, right? On a personal level, there are forces operating in your life. You and I are complicit in this. Every single day, we're complicit in it. And if you're going to follow Jesus, you got to open your eyes and you have to be willing to acknowledge that. There are military, political, economic, and religious forces operating in your personal life, pressuring you all the time to keep your life the way it is, to maintain a sort of status quo. Don't rock the boat too much, right? We want just enough Jesus to look respectable, but not too much Jesus that he starts, messing around with the life that we're trying to create for ourselves. The very wealthy and comfortable and powerful life that we all sort of want. Because who would want a life where you're not powerful, really poor? Like nobody chooses that life, right? You have to be willing to acknowledge that there are forces in the world and on your life always pressuring you to keep things the way they are. Because you benefit from it, because it works for you. Anytime somebody comes along with a challenge, with some potential change, and it's a change that's going to hurt you. It might benefit somebody else, but it's going to hurt you. Because it's really hard to benefit anyone else if it doesn't hurt you. That's just kind of how it works. So anytime something comes, down the pipe that's going to benefit someone, but it's going to hurt you, there's that part of you that goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute. That's that pressure to self-preserve. And it happens all the time. It happens every day, probably in countless ways, in ways that maybe you're not even conscious of or that you don't ever self-reflect on. This pressure to self-preserve. In response, Jesus calls Herod a fox. So you go tell that fox, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep casting out demons, and I'm going to keep healing people. I'm going to do it today. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I'm going to keep doing it until I accomplish my purpose. And he says on the third day. That's a reference to the cross and the resurrection. It's like Jesus saying, I know that what I'm doing and how I'm going about it is going to lead to my death. I know that. I'm aware of that. I've already predicted that. I've already told my disciples that that's going to happen. This is not a big mystery to me. I know that. And what I'm doing is more important to me than my physical life. In many ways, Jesus is saying, my life is what I'm doing. I can't separate these things. The bottom line is I am going to be faithful to my Father no matter what the cost, even if it means my life. So you quite literally cannot, you can't negotiate with me. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. You make sure to go let Herod know that. He calls Herod a fox. Then he turns to the city of Jerusalem, not the leaders, right? Not the military, political, economic, and religious leaders. He turns to the city. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that stones the prophets and kills God's messengers, how I've longed like a mother hen to protect her chicks. I've longed to protect you, but you wouldn't let me. So you got a fox and you got a hen house." Now that the leaders would like the people of Jerusalem to believe that Jesus is dangerous. He's dangerous. And they're right. But he threatens their way of life. He threatens the status quo. He's a renegade. He's radical. He's subverting our law. He's gonna anger the Romans, and then they're gonna show up with their army and kill everybody. And the bottom line is Jesus is a threat to this sort of stasis that we have that makes life possible. And so we need to get rid of him. And leaders are very good at convincing people of this sort of thing. Like the leadership in Jerusalem, they were very good at convincing the people of Jerusalem. When God would send a prophet, someone to talk to the people, to try to knock some sense into them, the leaders who were committed to the status quo were very, very good at convincing the people, no. That guy's a false prophet. He's not from God. If he were from God, he wouldn't, what prophet comes from Nazareth? Of course he's not. We know where this guy comes from. We know his mom. We know his dad. They were very good at this sort of thing. I mean, if you read the scriptures, actually 2 chapters prior to this, in Luke chapter 11, Jesus actually says to the religious leaders, this generation, meaning the people that are right in front of me, are going to be held responsible for all of the murders from Abel to Zechariah. Those are bookends in the Hebrew scriptures. Abel was the first murderer in the Bible. Zechariah is a prophet who is murdered. They represent sort of bookends. What Jesus is saying to them is, when you murder me, you murdering me is like the pinnacle example of all the murders you've done throughout all of human history, from Abel to Zechariah. This is what you do. God sends you somebody to talk some sense into you, to help you see what you're either incapable or unwilling to see. You accuse that person of being from the devil, and then you kill him. And then, only after the fact, somebody builds a monument. And this is the irony that Jesus sees. You guys have all killed all of these prophets, and then someone builds a monument to honor them. I mean, talk about an admission of guilt. So Jesus calls Herod a fox, calls the people of Jerusalem chicks. It's a fox in a hen house. So that the leaders want the people to think that Jesus is the threat. What Jesus is trying to tell them is, no, I'm not the threat. I'm dangerous. Make no mistake about it. But the real threat to your lives is this trinity of forces that are always pressuring you to keep things the way they are. What really threatens to kill your soul are the military, political, economic, and religious forces that are always pressuring you, chirping in your ear. Don't change too much. Don't give up too much. Not too much, Jesus. See, Jesus sees what is about to happen to him as the chief fulfillment. I mean, that's language he would use. The pinnacle example of what's happened to all of God's messengers that have come before him. That's why he looks at them and says, look, your house is abandoned, and you're never going to see me again until you quote these words. Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. That's language from Psalm 118. That is the same psalm where we get the words, that the stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Have you heard that phrase before? This was a phrase that Jesus used as a way of predicting his own death. That I'm the stone that you are rejecting, and 3 days after you reject me, you're going to discover that I was the chief cornerstone the whole time. So when Jesus quotes Psalm 118 in this encounter, this is what he's getting at. What he's getting at is your obsessive penchant to keep life the way that it is. Listening to all of the powers and the forces in your life in order to maintain your status quo. You're always killing the people that God sends to you, and you're going to do the same thing to me. And only after the fact, after I die and rise from the dead, are your eyes going to be open, and are you finally going to realize what you're up to and what you've been doing, what you've always been doing. See, what you've never been able to see before on Easter Sunday, you're finally going to be able to see. Because everybody else you killed, they never came back. So you just went on with your business thinking that, well, we obviously did the right thing. But see, when you kill me 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead. And you're going to have to face what you did. You're going to have to acknowledge the lie that you believed. See, Jesus is dangerous. Don't get me wrong. Jesus only comes into your life as a change agent. This is the only way that I know him. And that's not to say that everything in your life needs to change. But the more that you let Jesus into your life, the more that we let Jesus into our lives, our corporate experience as a church, the more you are going to experience challenge. The more stuff Jesus is going to put his finger on and say, okay, now this needs to go. Or this is something that you now need to do that you didn't know you needed to do. He's going to give you concerns and cares that you previously didn't have. What I'm saying is that the more that you follow Jesus and the closer to Jesus you get, the more times you are going to experience moments of either maintaining the status quo that you've always had or choosing the Jesus way. You're going to experience more and more and more challenge. Opportunity to change or keep the status quo. It's why, here, as much as we can, one of our primary values is grow. But you don't grow without being challenged. So one of our primary values is growing, which means you got to be challenged, which means you got to be uncomfortable. It's like we just change things here just for the sake of changing them, just to see what you'll do. Right? Well, but Mike, we always put the piano over here. No, we put the piano wherever we want. Deal with it. Well, but Mike, his service has always been at 9. Well, I don't care. We'll do it at 9:30. Just see what you do. I mean, getting used to just things don't have to be the way that you have always known them to be. And maybe they shouldn't be. And maybe there are things that you're into politically, militarily, economically, religiously. You shouldn't be. Maybe you're being pressured in ways that you need to start opening your eyes to and going, you know what? I need to start changing the way that I think about my life, and I need to start changing the way that I live my life. The promise of the powers, right, this alliance of powers, the promise of the powers is a promise of life. They promise you life. Stick with us, and you'll live. What they deliver you is death. They kill your soul. And that's not hard to see. I mean, it's super easy to see when you turn on the news and you see a mass shooting where 50 human beings are senselessly killed. That's easy to see. This pressure to keep things the way they are, or to have them your way, it does not lead to life, ever. And you know that. You play this out in your marriages or with your kids, it just never leads to life. It leads to you being alone. Jesus' invitation is to die. He makes no bones about it. It's the worst sales pitch in human history. Come follow me. Die to yourself. Die to yourself. But it delivers life. That you go through this process of dying, but you experience resurrection, newness of life, real life. I mean, that's Jesus' promise to the world. But you have to trust him enough to go through the dying process, to be willing to not always self-preserve. So the simple question this morning for you to think about, wrestle with, talk about, over brunch or lunch, right, is in what ways are you experiencing, or where do you discern forces at work in your life pressuring you to keep things the way they are? Always pressuring you, keep things the way they are. Well, if I did that, then we'd have to do this. Well, yeah, but if we changed that, then we would have to do this, and that would be really hard. See, anytime you hear that kind of language going on, there are pressures on you. Don't go too much, don't give too much, don't hurt too much, you don't want to sacrifice too much. That would be hard. Where do you discern pressures in your life? Right? And is Lent maybe the season where you need to start being honest about those things? And maybe change the way you think about them or change the way you live?